Quote, Homestuck, the webcomic from the internet from 2009, contains slurs. I know, please contain your shock and alarm because I'm here to tell you why it's actually okay. The dreaded cancel culture isn't coming for you this time, Andrew Hussie. As we all know, media can be split into two groups, good media and bad media. Good media are things like She-Ra and Steven Universe, with nothing problematic about them whatsoever, and bad media are things like SpongeBob and Family Guy for having bad, problematic jokes. So the question is Homestuck good or bad? Well, of course, since it contains words that offend people, you'd think it's bad, right? I know. It's horrible to think about, the fact that you might have to not like Homestuck anymore because it has a bad word in it. But I'm here to soothe your worries. So sit back in your gamer chair, take a big swig of white grape juice, and let me explain why Homestuck isn't problematic and bad, actually. First, let's talk about Mark Twain. Now, as we know, Mark Twain is one of the good writers, even though he used the N-word sometimes. Was Mark Twain a racist for using a bad word? Of course not, because the culture of the time was different. When Mark Twain was writing, the word had a different cultural context. So it's okay for Hussie to use the R slur, actually, because it was used in a different cultural context. In the ancient days of 2009, it was probably less bad to use the R slur. But maybe that's not good enough for you. Maybe the R slur was used to advance the narrative or themes in some way. Inflammatory language, after all, is only as bad as how it's used. So maybe Andrew Hussie used the word as some kind of critique on the modern use of it. Yeah, I'm sure that's it. Well, there you have it then. Whew, we can rest easy knowing that Andrew Hussie, who we all know is basically the contemporary Mark Twain, used the slurs for deep cultural reasons. And censoring them goes against his noble goals. Andrew Hussie is simply telling it like it is, enshrining the vernacular of that time. And because it's accurate, that means we can't critique it. Unquote. This is an example of what I would say if I were a dope and a fool. Before we get into discussing slurs and Homestuck, let's talk about the R slur. You might have noticed that I haven't actually said the word, and that's because I don't really want to. I'll be displaying it on screen presently, and from here on, I'll be discussing it using the euphemism R word, R slur, or just R. R was first used in the 60s in psychological circles as a very clinical term, used to describe anyone with intellectual disabilities, especially learning disabilities. Very quickly, it morphed into the R word, which was then used in playgrounds the world over, utilized as a pejorative term for anyone doing anything stupid. The reason it's a slur and not just a pejorative like dumb or stupid is simple. It was once used to define an actual group of people, namely the learning or mentally impaired, which then went on to become a general term as well as a term specifically targeting those people. It was an identity weaponized as an insult. In 2009, particularly online, terms such as R proliferated as shorthand for anything senseless, perpetuating the slur, joined by others that described similar learning disabilities. More common today is the term autism, used as an insult from 4chan to Twitter, despite being another clinical psychological term. The reason, then, that the Mark Twain argument doesn't hold up is because the R slur was being used in the same context in 2009 as it is today, as a pejorative. Sure, decades ago it might have been a legitimate clinical term, but nowadays and in 2009 when Andrew Hussie was writing, it was a slur. Now, a great many people, Andrew Hussie included, likely didn't consider it a slur and used it without knowledge, particularly young people on the internet, particularly the type of people that Hussie was writing for when creating the characters of John, Rose, Dave, Carcat, etc. So this isn't to say that Hussie was sitting in an office rubbing his hands together saying, "I will say slurs," evilly to himself. I'm saying that it's a part of internet culture at the time. Still, even early in the comic's run, Hussie was criticized for his use of the word. Hussie never directly responded to these critiques, but he has discussed the use of words in the commentary books published by Viz Media. It's unknown when these commentary books were written, but it's at least after 2016 when Homestuck ended. In the Homestuck Book 2 commentary on page 160, Hussie says, "John calls the trolls retards, which is pretty ableist of him. Who knew a 13-year-old kid could be such a jerk?" From Book 3, page 55. "Welp, John did it. The madman did it. He said retarded. It's not so hot to say in the media these days. Maybe it never was. Probably not. But at some point on the cultural continuum between the present year and, let's say, sometime in the 90s, it gradually drifted from being sort of an edgy bad thing for a shitty teen to say to something legitimately unacceptable, even for fake teens to say in a thing that entertains people. Anyway, the point is, let's throw this very bad boy under the bus where he belongs and leave me sitting spotless as always upon my perch of exoneration. Also, a few demerits to Jade for failing to call him out. Wow, what a bitch." This is all pretty tongue-in-cheek, but it establishes Hussie's understanding of the term at least. It's unclear due to how tongue-in-cheek he's being, what he makes of the term itself, so it's difficult to understand what he means, other than this sort of limp acknowledgement. Unfortunately, this acknowledgement flies out the window when we read his commentary from Book 1, page 258. Quote, "Exhaustive list of the type of babies who don't believe in that stuff. Non-retarded babies who poop in their diapers, both retarded and non-retarded babies who poop in places in their diapers but never in them, retarded babies who are able to refrain from pooping altogether, and non-retarded babies who fit that description as well. So as you can see, if you are a baby who believes in that stuff, you are in pretty elite company when it comes to such embarrassing displays of naivete." This makes it pretty clear that he's still comfortable using the term as a joke at the time that the books were published. He's never acknowledged this passage otherwise. Hussie has always been good at rhetorical smokescreens like this. The author's commentary is full of it, and he likes to play at being some kind of impish trickster, a neutral party to this story that seemed to come out of thin air. On the one hand, he mentions his perch of exoneration in jest, but on the other, he seems to actually believe this is where he belongs, and instead his characters, who we will remember he wrote, should instead catch the flack for it. Even with this acknowledgement that the slur isn't good, maybe there's still a case to be made. After all, like I said before, incendiary language is only bad as the intent. So what is the intent? Is Hussie making some commentary about the usage of the word back then? Is the word being used by some villain to exemplify how bad it is? Well, let's take the example he was responding to from Book 1. Quote, "Pff, monsters. Only retarded babies who poop in their diapers believe in that stuff." End quote. What is Hussie saying by using this word in this context? Well, nothing. He's using it as an insult. The meaning of this particular passage wouldn't change if you substituted R for any other acceptable insult. For example, "Pff, monsters. Only brain-dead babies who poop in their diapers believe that stuff." Pff, monsters. Only stupid babies who poop in their diapers believe in that stuff. Or hell, if those are too risque for you, pff, monsters. Only silly babies who poop in their diapers believe in that stuff. The sentiment doesn't change. But sure, this is only one instance of R in the text. What about the other times Hussie used it? The 34 other times Hussie used it. Let's find out. The use of R in the text is pretty uniform. It's never used as a joke punchline. Each use, if you search the term on Homestuck's search feature, is used as synonymous with stupid. Occasionally, it is used closer to its more clinical definition. For instance, Vriska makes reference to handicapped people on page 2202 when using the slur. The last time the term was used was on page 5480 by Caliborn in 2012. This was a little past the halfway point in page count and about a third of the way in terms of the date. Mostly the term is used by John, but frequent offenders include Dave and Carcat, a handful of times by others like Vriska, aforementioned, or Pfeffery on page 2991 and Mina on page 4985. Another prominent incident is when Carcat calls Nepeta autistic on page 2161. Given this handful of uses, what is Hussie trying to say here? I certainly can't think of anything, but I'm certainly not the only person who's ever discussed this online. Well, let's plumb the depths of the internet to see what other people have to say about this. This argument comes ripe from everyone's favorite little internet cesspool, the Homestuck subreddit. There's a Google Doc that's been floating around since 2018, author unknown, that is essentially Homestuck's problematic laundry list. I don't know who decided to compile this, and I'm not going to defend its use, but its first section is titled Ableism and goes over most of the same issues I've already enumerated. The Reddit user OSM7 made a post responding to this on July 23rd, 2020. Now, I'm not going to cover everything here, just what pertains to the use of slurs, but if you want to follow the discussion online for some fucking reason, the links are in the description. Quote, "The R slur being used is true. However, back when HS was being written, it was okay to say the word. No one considered it a slur yet. As for Karkat using autistic as an insult, did he really? Was it really an insult? Or is Nepeta actually autistic? You can't tell just from what Karkat said. Also, Hussie's author commentary says that it is probable for her to be autistic." End quote. The first part of this counter-argument can be discarded. When HS was being written, R was certainly not an acceptable term. Sure, it might have been okay to say, but that just means that there was no pushback against it yet, not that this was not used in a harmful manner. There's a big difference. The second part regarding Nepeta's autism, really? Seriously, really? Do people buy this? If Hussie intentionally wanted to write her as autistic, couldn't there be at least more explicit coding or something more direct? Karkat was speaking about her disparagingly, so even if she was autistic, he's not using it as a descriptive term. He's using it as a pejorative. GA8D guy in the comments responds thusly, quote, "Homestuck is a product of its time, and even if it wasn't, the characters presented are all socially inept children, so of course some weird stuff's gonna come out of their mouth." End quote. This is what's called a Thermian argument or a diegetic argument. What is happening here is interesting, and I've seen a lot of arguments for it in the past, not just about Homestuck. Basically what they're saying is, John, Dave, and Karkat are all just dumb 13-year-olds. Surely you wouldn't begrudge the uncritical speech of a 13-year-old, that would be ridiculous. And that's sort of true. We've all said stupid things at 13 we regret and are smart enough to understand later in life. But John isn't a 13-year-old. John isn't anything. John isn't real. John is a character created by an adult man named Andrew Hussie, puppeteered to say those words. The criticism doesn't fall to John, it falls to the person who wrote John. A response by AXC of God. That'd apply if the author was using it in dialogue for a particular reason, to say something specific about the characters and not just because it was in the author's own regular vocabulary. This is that second one, though. Hussie didn't make John and Karkat at all drop the R word to say anything about them. That's just a word he himself used to use, so his characters did too. End quote. The other misconception, I think, is at the heart of all this is one that's more subtle. It's present in Awesome 70's original post, and it's present in the comments too, even though it's never explicitly stated. And it's one that I tried to get at during the beginning of this essay. The issue is embodied by a simple question. What do you think critique is for? Epimetheus Emrys writes, "Can I just say how loathsome the entire archetypical post of popular thing is actually terrible and here's why? Like, it's okay to bring attention to an issue, but don't tell me how to feel. I'll get upset of my own accord. I can come to my own conclusions. Don't try to make me part of some angry mob. That's no way to handle an issue like this." End quote. But where in the original Google document is the writer trying to form an angry mob? Where in the Google document is the writer trying to tell Emrys how to feel? The purpose of the original Google document in question, and moreover, critique in general, is not to try to take down a particular piece of work. It's not to try to make you feel ashamed for enjoying it. There's this strange defensiveness that can be felt in many of the comments, as though it's not Homestuck that the author of this post is criticizing. It's almost like it's being levied at them for enjoying something. If you enjoyed Homestuck without noticing the slurs, if you didn't see the issue, then frankly, all power to you. I'm glad. But when someone comes forth and says, something made me uncomfortable, they're not trying to take anyone down. They're not trying to shame anyone for enjoying Homestuck. They're just saying they felt a certain way. They're saying that they felt alienated by a piece of art they probably like a lot, just like you, if they care enough to make a critique of it. So what Hussie is saying when he acknowledges these criticisms but fails to remove these words from his work is essentially, I don't care that I hurt your feelings. Does this mean Homestuck is bad? No. Does this mean that you should feel ashamed for not hating it or not noticing this? No. It doesn't even mean that the people who have been offended are entitled to have those words removed. Andrew Hussie, just like everyone else living in a country with freedom of speech, has the right to offend people. He has the right to ignore criticism, he has the right to leave in his words, and he has the right to be a jerk. And you'd better believe he's flexing those rights. In the same vein, then, the people criticizing him have a right to say that they're hurt, too. They have a right to say this sucks, and they have a right to spread that belief to others. No amount of rebuttal or complaining on Reddit can change the fact that someone felt shitty about a decision that Andrew Hussie made.